dead, there lived in one village a woman, her name was Mary, whom everyone considered a fool. She was unsociable and ugly, and no one even knew how old she was. Her skin seemed to be without wrinkles, smooth, but her look was as if the woman had long since become tired of everything in the world. However, Mary rarely focused it on anyone's face. She was too withdrawn to communicate even with her eyes. The strangest thing was that no one remembered how she appeared in the village. After the war, everything got mixed up, many left, strangers, on the contrary, came, some stayed forever. Probably, this woman was one of these wanderers in search of a better fate. She occupied the outermost of the empty houses near the forest, very dilapidated and small, and in another 10 years, brought it to a state of complete desolation. Sometimes a compassionate neighbor repaired her roof, and then muttered into her smoky mustache, "There was no thanks." She had rainwater from the ceiling drumming into the basin. "I did everything. It became dry." And this Mary not only didn't say thank you, and didn't even look me in the face. Nobody knew how she lived or what she ate. She always wore the same dress, the hem of which was heavy with dried mud. In the same thing, but she smelled not of the thick musk of human secretions that are not washed off the skin, but of mold. And then one day, in the early 60s, one of the local guys, having too much whiskey, broke into her house. Either someone egged him on, or the desire for abstract femininity was so strong that the object no longer mattered. The May night then was quiet, clear, full moon, with the thick aromas of blossoming grasses and awakened crickets. The guy's name was Vincent, and he was 25 years old. He broke into Mary's house, and right away, in the hallway, he felt uneasy. There was a strange smell in the house, emptiness and decay. Even the village alcoholic Uncle John's home smelled completely different, even though he drank his soul back in the days when Vincent was a baby. Uncle John smelled of a warm stove, strong sweat, unwashed feet, sour milk, a rotten floor rag. It was disgusting, and yet in the cacophony of fetid aromas one could feel life, albeit almost degraded into existence, but still alive. And Mary smelled as if no one had entered her house for decades, a damp basement, dusty curtains, and mold. Vincent suddenly wanted to turn around and run away, but somehow he convinced himself that this was not manly. And he moved forward by touch, because darkness reigned in the house. The windows were curtained from the moonlight with some kind of rag. He pushed his hands forward into some door. It gave way and opened with a quiet creak. Vincent carefully stepped inside, lightly hitting his head on the crossbar. Mary was not tall, and the doors in the house were a match for her. Because of the darkness, Vincent quickly lost his orientation in space, but suddenly someone moved cautiously in the corner, and the animal horror that darkness combined with an unfamiliar place brings to most people suddenly awakened the warrior and barbarian in the guy. With a short cry, Vincent rushed forward. "Go away," came Mary's voice, quiet and muffled, and Vincent could swear that he was hearing it for the first time. Many were generally sure that the eccentric from the last house had gone numb during the war years, but never came to her senses. She stretched out her hand to the window, pulled back the curtain, and Vincent finally saw her in the bluish light of the moon. Her calm, ugly face seemed dead. "Here's another." He tried to make his voice sound cheerful, but due to excitement, it became thin, and, annoyed with himself for this, he poured out his anger at Mary, jabbing his fist into her lifeless face. Come on. I'll be quick." She did not resist, and this calmness gave him strength. "She's probably dreaming about this herself. She's happy to death and doesn't believe her luck," he thought. "I guess she hasn't had a guy for 20 years, if not more." Mary was all wrapped in some kind of rags, like a shroud. Vincent seemed to have unbuttoned his outer jacket, a woolen one, but underneath it there was some kind of robe, and even deeper, something that seemed to be nylon. Slippery and cool to the touch. Finally, angry, he tore at the rags, and they cracked and almost crumbled into dust in his palms. Mary lay still silent, with her arms stretched out at her sides, like a deceased woman who was being prepared for ablution. Her eyes were open, and from the corner of his consciousness Vincent suddenly noticed that they were not shining. Mad eyes, like a doll's, but volcanic lava was already boiling in his blood, wanting to pour out, freeing him from the fire, and he almost didn't care who would open the vent, whether a warm woman, a slobbering fist, or this gray doll. Mary's breasts looked like empty canvas bags in which Vincent's mother kept the nuts he collected in the forest. There was no fullness or milky softness in her breasts, and her nipples resembled tree mushrooms, rough and dark. I didn't want to touch them. At that moment, Vincent's consciousness seemed to split in two. One part did not understand how one could desire this withered wax body, it was scary, disgusting, and the other, as if bewitched, only obeyed blind will, impulse and passion. With his knee, he spread Mary's thighs as cool and grayish as if they were waxy, and with one jerk he entered her and to that part of Vincent's consciousness, which was scared and disgusted. It seemed that his flesh was entering not into a woman, but into a jar of cold yogurt. Mary's insides were loose, cold and damp, and so, having poured his seed into her, Vincent left, getting tangled in his pants along the way. He felt as if he had been working in a forest all day. But he chalked up the weakness and dizziness to his whiskey. I came home and, without undressing, fell into bed. All night he was tormented by nightmares. He dreamed that he was walking through a village cemetery, between the graves, and earth-stained hands were reaching out to him from all sides. They tried to grab the pant leg, and their fingers are icy and hard. There was a buzzing in his ears, voices, deprived of the juice of life, begged, "And to me. And to me. Please. And to me." A girl appeared on the path in front of him. She stood with her back turned, fragile, short, long blonde hair scattered over her shoulders. She was wearing a wedding dress. Vincent rushed to her as if he were a savior goddess. But she slowly turned around, and it became clear that she was also dead. The pale face had greenish spots, the once plump upper lip had half rotted away, revealing teeth, and there was no sparkle in the eyes. To me," she repeated dully. "Come. They buried me in the wedding dress on purpose. I was waiting for you." Vincent woke up to his mother splashing ice water from a ladle in his face, completely crazy, drunk. "I drank myself to hell and screamed all night, as if I had nerves of iron." Several weeks have passed. At first, Vincent could not get rid of the feeling of melancholy, as if heavy wings had spread over him, blocking out the sunlight. Lost appetite, desire to laugh, work, breathe. But gradually he somehow recovered, came to his senses, and again began to look at the most beautiful girl in the village, Stephanie, with long thick braids and devils in her eyes. He tried not to meet with Mary, however. It was not difficult. She rarely left her house, and if she went out onto the village street, she huddled to the side of the road and looked at her own dusty shoes, and not at the people she met. Gradually the strange night evaporated from memory, and Vincent was not even entirely sure of its reality. His consciousness had formed a kind of snowball from real facts and the ensuing nightmares. It was no longer possible to understand what was true and what was a terrible image fabricated by inner darkness. And then one day at the end of November something strange happened. There was a knock on the door, insistently, as if it was an urgent matter. And when Vincent opened it, there was no one on the street. The man who disturbed the evening peace of the family seemed to be dissolved by the icy space spitting wet snow. Only on the floorboard, crushed by a wet stone, was a white envelope. Looking around, Vincent picked it up, looked inside and was even more surprised. There was money inside. Not millions, but a substantial sum. That's what he would have asked for just for the construction of a summer terrace. For the realities of the village, this was something out of the ordinary. The neighbors, of course, did not starve, but there was nothing to save money from, and everyone preferred to pay for work in installments. A note fell out of the envelope along with the bills. "I ask you to make a coffin, length 3 feet, material oak or pine. Take the money right away, and I will come for the finished work as soon as possible." Vincent was not one of the timid, and certainly not one of the superstitious. But something inside him went cold when he finished reading. Length, 1 meter. It turns out that the coffin is for children. Why are they willing to pay so much for it? If the customer had asked him for the price, Vincent would have told him an amount 20 times less, and he would not have considered himself offended. Why did you choose such a strange way to order? Such grief that the faces of strangers make you sick? But it turns out that he wasn't even given a choice. Who should he return the money to? You can, of course, keep them in an envelope, and when the customer arrives, slip them back to him from the doorway. On the other hand, and if there is a child dying, and then a person comes, but nothing is ready. Should I bury him in a towel, or what? Vincent's soul was heavy, but he still got the job done. I managed it in 2 evenings. He took the best boards and tried as if he were making a casket for imperial jewelry. I even decorated the lid with carvings. There's nothing to do anyway on winter evenings. A week passed, then another, and then a third began, but no one came for the work. The small coffin stood in the already cramped entryway and got on everyone's nerves. And now, on New Year's Eve, it turned out to be an evening when Vincent was left at home all alone. My parents and little sister had gone to visit relatives and were going to spend the night there. The evening turned out to be dark and blizzard. You couldn't see either the earth or the sky behind the thick shell of snowfall, and suddenly there was a knock on the door, the same persistent, hasty knock. Vincent immediately recognized it, and the guy's heart sank as if from an endless ice slide, carefully approaching the door. He asked who, but he was not answered. For some reason, crossing himself, he unlocked the door. Standing on the porch was a short woman, wrapped in a fur coat and a large woolen scarf. Vincent did not even immediately recognize her as Mary, and when he saw her emotionless gray face, he recoiled. "What do you want? Why did you stick around?" He tried to draw strength from deliberate rudeness. "It's time," she answered dully, and walked past him inside. "I thought I'd wear it for a few more weeks, but now I see that it's not." "It's time. What are you talking about, fool? Go where you came from." And then Mary raised her face to him. Vincent retreated a few steps, his gaze helplessly darting around the hallway until he buried himself in the small hatchet with which he and his father were chopping wood to kindle the stove. Some kind of nonsense. "I won't come at her, a weak woman, with an axe. I can kill her with my finger. What will she do to me, poor thing?" And the woman just calmly looked at him, and her eyes looked like puddles covered in ice. Just as dim and doll-like as that night he had been trying to forget all these months. Mary grinned, still without emotion. "What are you doing, Vincent? You thought you'd have some fun and not have to answer? Bring water and rags, I'm giving birth, what the hell?" And then I just saw a huge round belly under her open padded jacket. "It's going to start any minute now, why are you delaying?" She did not at all look like a woman who was worried about the arrival of her first child. A bloodless, calm face, chapped lips, an even, quiet voice. "Besides, I paid. Everything is fair. Did you do what I asked?" Managed. Vincent didn't even immediately understand what she was talking about, and when he did, he suddenly felt small and defenseless. "Why do you need a coffin?" He breathed out the last word almost in a whisper into Mary's face. "Well, of course," she grinned. "He needs to sleep somewhere. The baby will be born dead," and stroked her tight belly. Vincent felt sick. "Put on the water," Mary commanded. "And bring some rags." It's starting. As in a dream, he reached the stove, took the kettle, then climbed into his mother's chest and found some old sheets. Everything that was happening seemed to him like a stupid joke. He couldn't believe that the village fool was really going to give birth in his hallway, that he would have to take part in it. And this damn money, and this coffin. The dead one will be born. When Vincent returned to the hallway, Mary was already lying on the floor, her skirts lifted up and her bloodless legs spread out to the sides, her back arched, as if the woman had been struck by lightning, but her face still did not express any fear, pain, or anticipation. Sister Vincenta was also born at home. Contractions began suddenly. It was also winter. They would not have had time to get to the rural hospital. He remembered his mother's flushed, sweaty face, her guttural cry, more like an animal growl. He remembered how her hair, matted with sweat, was scattered across the pillow, and what the smell was in the room, hot, thick, visceral, and how he also felt uneasy, but that was a different fear, the fear of the presence of some eternal pattern. The mother asked her to drink, then to put a handful of snow on her forehead, then to open the window, then to close it. And then he heard his sister's muffled cry, and he and his father drank a glass, rejoicing, and his mother looked so happy. Despite the fact that all the blankets were soaked in her blood, Mary silently, gritting her teeth, brought new life into the world. She worked with her hips and back deftly, like a snake, and the canopy was also filled with a foreign smell: peat bog, humus, wet tree roots, earthworms. Suddenly it gushed out. As if a faucet had opened, the waters receded, greenish-brown, like a stagnant pond. Vincent had to jump away. There was so much stinking liquid that the entire floor in the hallway was flooded. He did not even immediately notice that in this slurry a tiny creature, a baby, as gray and lifeless as his mother, had emerged from her womb into the light. Mary sat down, wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, and picked up the baby from the floor. He was moving his arms sluggishly. His eyes were open and as if covered with a whitish film. Vincent looked away. For some reason it was unpleasant to look at the child. There was something not right about him. He didn't even scream, but he was already turning his head, clearly trying to look around. "Why are you standing there?" Mary called gloomily. "You need to cut the umbilical cord." "I don't know how," Vincent mumbled, almost losing consciousness from fatigue and disgust. "What can you do?" "There's a hatchet over there, use it to chop it up." "What are you talking about? Is it really possible to do that with an axe?" "I'll call Grandma Martha now." A saving thought suddenly occurred to him. "I'll just run after her. She knows how to do this." "You don't need to call anyone," Mary stopped him. "It's your own fault, you'll have to answer for it yourself. Get the axe. I'll teach you. And carry the coffin." "He already wants to sleep." "See, Mary, why does he need a coffin? Why are you saying such a terrible thing?" Vincent could not stand it. "Where have you seen a child sleeping in a coffin? You said that the baby would be born dead, but here he is, moving, so I'm dead." The gray lips stretched, but it didn't look like a smile. "Didn't understand? Carry the coffin. And you yourself need to rest. Otherwise, he will soon get hungry. You'll wake up and I'll teach you how to feed the dead." The last thing Vincent saw before he was covered by the velvet wing of darkness was an old ceiling with branching cracks. When the parents and sister returned the next morning, the guy's body had already cooled down, but his wide eyes retained an expression of incredulous melancholy. No one understood what happened to him, but the entire floor of the entryway was flooded with thick swamp water, which Vincent's father could not bail out in a day, and when he scooped it dry, the smell still remained. Decay, mold, and rot remained for many years, sometimes promisingly subsiding, but inevitably returning at the beginning of each winter. Mary was never seen again in that village, but for many years they gossiped that the muffled and monotonous cry of a baby was sometimes heard from her empty house.